Hi, John Morgan here with the Keep Growing podcast. A couple weeks ago, I was planting my garden and thinking about seeds and philosophy. Seeds represent potential, hope, and rebirth. Every gardener knows the feeling of sowing seeds in the garden, seeing them sprout, and nursing them along throughout the growing season. You also know the feeling of loss when a seed doesn't sprout or a pest causes damage. One of my favorite authors, Wendell Berry, a farmer and writer from Kentucky, sums up this feeling the best, and it'll be our bit of gardening wisdom for this week. It comes from his book, Tobacco Harvest, an elegy, published in 2004. He writes, "There is a kind of idealism that seems to be native to farming. Farmers begin every year with a vision of perfection, and every year, in the course of the seasons and the work, this vision is relentlessly whittled down to a real result. By human frailty and fallibility, by the mortality of creatures, by pests and diseases, by the weather. The crop year is a long struggle, ended invariably not by the desired perfection, but by the need to accept something less than perfection as the best that could be done." To me, Berry perfectly captures the feeling I face each year as a gardener. We always strive for perfection, but it's a fact of nature that we will always get something less. It's also a great allegory for the fallibility of man and the imperfection of the world around us. Sometimes we just have to accept those imperfections and our own shortcomings as an unavoidable part of life. However, it is fun to let our imaginations run wild at the beginning of the growing season as we sow seeds and hope for beautiful flowers and a bountiful harvest. In this episode, we're going to explore the basics of seed because, in the garden, seed is everything. Let's start off by taking a look at some of the basic science behind seeds. And to do that, we're going to have to talk a little bit about how plants are categorized. The plant kingdom can be divided into a few broad categories based on their characteristics. All living things were traditionally placed into one of two groups, plants or animals. This classification dates all the way back to Aristotle. Much later, when Linnaeus, in the 1700s, created the basis for the modern system of scientific classification, these two groups became the kingdoms. The plant kingdom can then be further divided down into a number of groups, but they can get pretty complicated, as in plant taxonomy can take up an entire college undergraduate course. That's something for another podcast. We'll just hit the basics here. The plant kingdom can be divided into non-vascular plants like mosses and vascular plants like ferns, flowers, and trees. However, among vascular plants, some reproduce by spores, for example ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. The rest are seed-producing plants, and they can be divided into gymnosperms, including conifers, and angiosperms, flowering plants. A seed is an embryonic plant enclosed in a protective outer covering. Seeds are the product of the ripened ovule after fertilization by pollen and some growth within the mother plant. Seeds are composed of two main parts, the seed coat and the embryo. The embryo can also be divided into a few basic parts, the cotyledons, the radicle, and the hypocotyl. Perhaps the easiest way to visualize this is to think of a roasted peanut. This is also a good place to point out a common misconception. Sometimes what might appear to be the outer seed coat is actually the fruit or a hardened shell of fruit. When you crack open the shell to get the peanuts inside, you're actually cracking open the fruit, or in this case, a pod if you want to get technical, since peanuts are legumes like beans and peas. Anyhow, once you get to the seed inside, this is where the actual seed, by scientific definition, starts. That brown papery coating is the seed coat. When you split the seed into its two halves, those are the cotyledons. And then, if you look closely, you'll see the tiny radicle and hypocotyl. The cotyledons, those two big halves, are the food supply for the seed once it germinates and sprouts. It's packed with nutrients. That's why we rely on many types of seed crops for food. Sandwiched between the cotyledons, you have the radicle and the hypocotyl. These will become the root and leaves of the baby plant. When you split some seeds open, you can actually see pretty well-defined leaves making up the hypocotyl. I mentioned germination, and that's another key gardening term you'll often hear. I don't want to get too technical in this episode, but germination is basically the process of triggering a seed to sprout. It is dependent on both internal and external factors. Exposure to water, temperature changes, exposure to light or darkness are some of the factors that can trigger germination. All plants are different, and a unique set of variables is needed for germination depending on the seed variety. Here at Bob's, we specialize in growing seedling plants, and our seeding crews have entire sets of charts on how to set up their seeding machinery, watering systems, and other equipment in order to ensure varieties germinate at an optimal level. It can all get pretty complicated. So, what about starting seeds at home? It might sound intimidating, but you know what? Retail seed companies have got your back. I recently interviewed the marketing horticulturalist at the seed supplier for our store locations to learn how they pick seeds and design their packets to give you the information you need to make sure your seeds grow and flourish. We dug into some of the terminology you might see on seed packs, and also what it means. Alright, so today I'm here with April Shelhon from Botanical Interest Seed. And April, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Botanical Interests?
Sure. John, I'm the marketing horticulturalist here at Botanical Interest Seed Company. It's kind of a funny job title, but what it means is I write the horticultural content, and that's the packets, blogs, articles, and then any other kind of materials that might come along. And I've been here for 3 years, and it's a great job. I came from a farming and biology and ag research background, and sometimes I miss the field, but it sure is nice to work among gardeners and help gardeners become better gardeners on a daily basis. Botanical Interests was started in 1995. It's a family-owned company. We're still pretty small, but we're in the Denver area, northwest Denver, and Broomfield is where we are located. We have over 600 varieties of seeds, and we have heirlooms, organic. We carry some hybrids for disease resistance, but we have flowers, vegetables, herbs. It's kind of the whole gamut, especially picked for home gardeners.
Okay, and our store, Bob's Market and Greenhouses, are our store locations. We just started carrying Botanical Interests this year. When a lot of people come into our stores, I'm not sure that they kind of fully know the background on how those seeds get to the store. So could you kind of describe that process for us?
Sure. So we work with farmers, a lot of small farmers and some a little bit larger that are all across the globe, actually. We make a contract kind of the year before based on what we think that we'll need and what, it's especially hard when it's a new item. We don't know how it'll be received, but we make a contract with that farmer the year before for how much seed that we think we'll be able to pack into packets and then get out to stores. We're actually in 3,500 stores, and that's where the company started. So we're all across the U.S. So it is a lot of planning ahead. So, the year before we know any new varieties we're going to have, we know who we're going to get them from, and we know approximately how many packets that we're going to push out the door. And so that also means that we have to start the research and packet writing process, which I do also.
Speaking of the seed packets, I really love the design of your all seed packets. I mean, they're just stuffed with information, literally, because you can open up the seed pack and print it on the inside. It has even more information.
The packet's gone through some minor changes through all those years, and we actually have a pretty exciting update this coming this next season. The owners of the company really felt there was a need to help people become gardeners and feel confident but not intimidated. So that was kind of the background behind putting all this extra information in the packet. And as you know, John, it ranges from a recipe to extra tips on how to use the product, maybe like flowers, how they last, when to pick them and how to make them last longest in a bouquet, to maybe the history behind the name, or the history in terms of it being an heirloom. So it is kind of a lot of research that goes into those. And then on the front, we're also known for our art on the front, which we use local artists from the Denver Botanical Gardens program, and they do those drawings for us, which is another part of the process that gets started the year in advance, because not every drawing makes it. So sometimes it has to be redone, and it's a lot more work than I had imagined before I got into the company. So I really appreciate all the details, and I love hearing from people like you that, that also appreciate all the work that goes in.
Yeah, I mean, your old seed packs, they are, I mean, on the front of them, they're a work of art, literally. And I just love the information that goes into them. You mentioned heirlooms and hybrids and organics. Could you describe some of the differences?
So heirloom is a term that's used to describe, just like you would like maybe a piece of furniture or jewelry. It's an older item that's been passed down. And there's no strict definition like there is for organic, where there'd be a certification for something to be heirloom. So it is good if you're wanting something of a certain age, that you ask the company what they consider to be an heirloom. Here at Botanical Interest, we consider something to be heirloom if we can research that it's at least 50 years old. And heirlooms are what is called open pollinated, meaning if you were, say, to have a tomato and pollinate that flower and save that seed, it would produce offspring that looked like the plant you stored the seed from. So that is considered open pollinated. Hybrids, on the other hand, have been developed by interbreeding. So you have two parent plants that really have no genetic variation. Like if you could think of, brown eyes being dominant, they've bred these two parents to where they know the dominant gene of that offspring seed, and it's just really consistent. Another term used for hybrids is called S1 hybrids. And so because you're using the seed from these two specialized parent plants, when you grow that plant, it has very predictable characteristics. But if you save the seed from that plant, it'll look like one of the parents. So hybrids, you don't want to save the seed from, because the offspring is unpredictable.
Yeah, so hybrids, it's basically like, well, I grew up on a farm, so it's sort of like if you take a horse and a donkey and breed them together and you get a mule. So it's almost two separate species. They're still very similar, but you're breeding them together to get something else. And in the case of a mule, they're infertile, so they're not able to reproduce themselves. So the only way that you can get a mule is by breeding a horse with a donkey. With hybrids, sometimes there's a little bit of confusion there between what a hybrid is and what a GMO is. A hybrid, where it's produced artificially through breeding together two plants, it's still not a GMO, a genetically modified organism. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, through the years, these words have gone through such transitions. And actually, initially, hybrids could be, something. It didn't necessarily mean an F1 hybrid, where we're talking about these specialized parent plants. It could be someone in their backyard that's, using a paintbrush to cross two plants to get a different color, for instance. So that word hybrid is kind of morphed into really being specifically meaning this F1 type hybrid. And it's kind of the same with GMOs. Genetically modified organisms used to actually cover this old style hybridization where a home gardener could be crossing plants, and it would be considered one type of genetic modification. But now we understand it, the consumers as a whole, it really represents what was originally called genetic engineering. And genetic engineering is where in a lab you introduce genes into a plant for various reasons, and those genes could be from another cultivar or variety, or they could be from another species altogether. And they've even combined things like fish genes into plants. So it's really like a lab type breeding program, and there's a lot of concern about it. And at Botanical Interest, we do not sell any genetically modified or genetically engineered seed at all. And our consumers really seem to appreciate that. There's something called the Safe Seed Pledge, and if you're ever concerned about a company's stance on GMOs, that's a good place to look and see if they've signed the Safe Seed Pledge, or there should be something on their website talking about where they stand.
Yeah, I know the seedlings that we produce here at Bob's, none of our seedlings are genetically modified. So when it comes to starting seeds, what are some tips that you would give for people starting seeds at home?
So you may want to start seeds indoors and outdoors, depending on what you're sowing. And on the seed packet, at least on ours, there's information on starting indoors or starting outdoors, and sometimes I'll put recommended on one or the other. And some reasons that indoor seed starting might be recommended would be because the vegetable, for instance, takes a long time to mature. So like in my garden in Colorado, we have a short growing season, so I tend to give some things a little head start that other people may not. Another reason we might recommend indoor seed starting is because of the soil temperature needed to get that seed to germinate. It varies with different varieties, especially species, but sometimes even varieties, on what soil temperature is best for germination. Because you want quick germination, because if the seed sits in cool soil, then it has the potential to succumb to fungus or rot in that meantime. Peppers are a really good example of something that should be started inside because they need soil temperatures between 80 and 90 degrees. And if they don't have that, they'll either fail altogether to germinate, or they can take 3 weeks, and then that kind of puts you behind schedule if you're waiting that long. That was a mistake I made my first year farming. So that one always kind of sticks with me. And if you're indoor seed starting, it is really nice to have a grow light. A south-facing window can do, but you'll definitely see plants starting to reach towards that window because it's not nearly as strong as them being directly outside under the sun. So if you have a grow light, you want to have it on for like 14 to 16 hours a day to kind of compensate for not being real sunlight. And then a soil thermometer is really handy, so you can know where your soil temperature is in case you need to put your seeds in a warmer area or maybe add a special heat mat, which I'm sure your store sells. So those are some factors, environmental factors that affect indoor sowing. And another important one is the media that you're growing in. It should be a seed starting mix, which is different than a potting soil. It's still sterile, but it has generally a finer texture, and it dries out more quickly, so the seeds don't succumb to rot. And sometimes they have a little bit of nutrient in it too. But it's really important to use sterile media when starting indoors, because otherwise, if you're using maybe compost from the garden, you can introduce pests and disease and to your fragile little seedlings. Starting outdoors, if the seed packet recommends that, or if it's an option, is actually best because plants like to be sown where they're going to grow. And the stress of transplanting actually puts them behind sometimes 2 weeks, so you're adding on to those days to maturity when you transplant. But sowing outdoors, the things that you want to think about is this plant frost tolerant, which is often indicated as cool season. Cool season means it can tolerate frost. So you won't want to plant something that is warm season until your average last frost date, which is different even based on zip code. So it's something you might want to look up online. And some other things to think about when sowing outdoors is amending the soil ahead of time so you don't have to disturb those plants. That if the plant needs full or part sun or shade, and full sun is 6 or more hours, part sun is 4 to 6 hours, and then shade is less than that. So kind of identifying in your garden where it's going to get that ideal sun, and then the soil amendment. And ahead of your soil amendment, I really recommend doing a soil test. They aren't very expensive. They're usually $20, $30, and you can send it off, and then that gives you kind of a baseline of what your garden needs. A lot of times we'll just put stuff in the garden, but we don't really know if we're over-nutrienting the garden soil, which can cause its own problems with growth or attracting pests. So starting with that soil test is really important. And that's about it. And then, get out there and get growing.
Finishing up, what are some ways folks can get in touch with you if they have questions?
Sure. So our website is botanicalinterest.com, and we have a section on there that's Ask the Horticulturalist in our contacts. Or they can reach me at horticulturalist@botanicalinterest with an S on the end.com.
I would like to thank April for sharing this great information with us on starting seeds indoors and outdoors. She mentioned the importance of getting a soil test done for your garden. If you missed our previous episode, it was all about soil. For some great information on that, and links, diagrams, and more about this episode, check out our show notes at bobsmarket.com/keepgrowing. She also mentioned using a grow light when starting seeds indoors. Well, it just so happens that we'll be talking about photosynthesis in our next episode. If you're listening on iTunes, Google Play, or other platforms, be sure to give us a review. You can also learn more about Bob's through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media. Check out Bob's Live, our weekly live broadcast on Facebook, where we explore what's happening in the greenhouse, my garden, or sometimes we do gardening demonstrations. We always shoot for something different with our Facebook broadcasts. If you want to contact me directly with questions, comments, or smart remarks, shoot me an email at keepgrowing@bobsmarket.com. Until next time, keep growing. The music in this week's episode is by PC3. Copyright 2018, Bob's Market and Greenhouses, Incorporated.